Make up mind. Fight.
So, I was pretty dang down on the whole iceberg trend for its first several years of existence due to just not really getting it. Hence why I'm only just now making one, striking while the iron is about as hot as an iceberg. However, as time has gone on, I've become increasingly appreciative of icebergs as a fun, easily digestible format for YouTubers to share information that they may find interesting without the baggage of a full retrospective or deep dive. Also, I realized that this video I made is basically an iceberg without the berg. And hey, Halloween's coming up, and I love talking about spooky things in non-spooky games, so I figured it was high time to make my own iceberg chart. This is the creepy, disturbing, and sad bosses in Nintendo games iceberg. Now, you'll have to bear with me. I've only watched a couple iceberg videos and actually actively constructed this one myself due to its subject not having its own dedicated one already made. I basically looked at a bunch of YouTube top 10s, Reddit threads, and just a whole bunch of mindless shorts to figure out what the most often mentioned creepy, disturbing, or scary Nintendo bosses were. Then I made some picks, organized them from top to bottom, based on an equal mix of how often they came up in those discussions, their general notoriety, and occasionally their content, and finalized my chart. It's ordered from what I feel to be the most famous and oft-discussed things at the top, to the more obscure stuff at the bottom. I also threw in a few of my own personal Nintendo boogeymen for good measure. I want to note that these are Nintendo bosses, so nothing in this video is really going to be pants-shittingly scary, and that a lot of this will be common information for people like me, who've been in the online gaming space for like 20 years. However, I like to think that every time something is discussed might be at least one person's first time hearing it, so I hope you enjoy this video regardless. We're also only talking about bosses in this video, so infamously scary non-boss stuff like the Mad Piano from Mario 64, the Majora's Mask Moon, or the Game Boy camera Easter egg will not be discussed. All that said, let's capitalize on this long-beaten dead horse as a means to give myself an excuse to make a third video about spooky children's game bosses. Let's delve into the depths. The Nightmare is a boss appearing in Metroid Fusion and Metroid Other M, a large, mechanical, and organic hybrid bioweapon with gravity manipulation powers. It's encountered in the late game of Metroid Fusion after it can be seen wrecking up the BSL station you're exploring at several points prior. Described as a bioweapon that escaped from its containment chamber and is now freely roaming the station, your dedicated guide character, Adam, insists that this thing is extremely dangerous, and once you've come face to face with it, that notion is made entirely too clear. The eponymous Nightmare hurls around its hulking, lurched frame as it does truckloads of damage while shooting lasers at you and manipulating the gravity around you for good measure. Once you blow off its already creepy, expressionless mask, its literally melting goop-like face will be exposed, deteriorating to a troubling degree as you fight it, to a point that it's literally dripping out of its head frame before it's finally defeated. A big part of Nightmare's creepiness, apart from its design, comes from the fact that it had been freely roaming around the BSL station alongside you for a good chunk of the game before this, giving off the vibe that, in universe, Samus could have run into it at any time. In Metroid Other M, Nightmare reappears as a boss, and it's both softened up while also being made significantly creepier in different ways, as its face no longer melts, yet it does scream and cry like a literal baby while you fight it, which is made even more troubling when you realize that this thing is a recently made and incomplete bioweapon. It basically is a large, very powerful infant that you're fighting. Metroid is a Nintendo series that's known to dabble with horror more than any other, Fusion specifically even more so, and a big part of that is due to the Nightmare. 02 is the final boss of Kirby 64 and the Crystal Shards, accessible only after collecting all 74 optional eponymous Crystal Shards in the game. Its battle is set in the enigmatic Dark Star, a secret 7th level comprised entirely of the recently expelled dark matter that Kirby has spent the entire game fighting. The dark matter that composes this specific level had recently been released from the possessed Fairy Queen by a beam of crystal light, courtesy of Kirby and friends. 02 is the mastermind behind the Fairy Queen's possession and the rest of the game's events, initiating an invasion of the otherwise peaceful Ripple Star with the presumed intention of snuffing out the crystal it houses, which act as its only weakness. In battle, 02 is fought in a warped red and black arena by Kirby and Ribbon, and has to be attacked in multiple sections to deal lasting damage. It initially appears as a friendly, smiling face, yet what seems to be its mouth is quickly revealed to be a single, gaping, bloodshot eye. This, alongside its wings and halo, give it the appearance of a warped fallen angel. It also seemingly bleeds upon taking damage to its eye for good measure, which funnily enough is not the only Kirby boss we'll be saying that about in this video. 02 can be defeated by blasting its eye, halo, and eventually gaseous green tail in equal measure in a grueling extended encounter, leading to its eventual demise. I know Kirby final bosses have a reputation for being kind of insane, and this is one of a few we'll be talking about in this video, but I find 02 specifically to be especially creepy due to the very overt religious theming and angel motifs in its design and theming. Just why is this thing like this? Maybe this is why this game's director retired after it released. Baby Bowser, also known as Mega Baby Bowser, is the final boss of Yoshi's Island for the SNES. After a short, simple, and to-the-point throwaway battle against Baby Bowser in his normal form, his caretaker, Kamek, will emerge to power him up, increasing his size by an absurd degree and beginning the true final boss. As an ominous SNES synth-electric guitar blares in the background, the player is transported to the shadowy remains of Baby Bowser's castle, where his now giant form looms shadowed in the background. He'll attack by hurling debris at the player to break the ground beneath their feet, pelting them with fireballs, and after taking enough hits, just fucking trucking at them, and the player has to hurl giant eggs in the background of Baby Bowser to defeat him. If they fail to do this before he reaches them, they'll suffer an instant game over. What makes Mega Baby Bowser so effectively frightening, primarily to a younger audience, is that this is the only thing in the game like this, and is tacked on to the very final section. Yoshi's Island had difficult moments and weird moments before this, but considering that this was a game starring Yoshi and Baby Mario, it had primarily been pretty unintimidating up to this point. The sheer aura, scale, and atmosphere of this final battle, combined with Baby Bowser's looming shadow-coated sprite that only gets bigger as he rushes at you, and his surprising speed, make this a final battle like no other in the Mario series, and arguably an even more intimidating one than adult Bowser in Super Mario World. The Water Wraith is an infamous enemy and boss from the Pikmin series, and a lot of people's definitive Nintendo boogeyman when all said and done. A large, watery, gelatinous creature riding two cylindrical rollers, the Water Wraith appears specifically in the submerged castle of Pikmin 2 as a terrifying surprise for slower players. It appears only after 5 minutes have passed in 4 of the dungeon's 5 levels, at which point it'll start making a beeline for the player's active captain and any Pikmin carrying treasures. It cannot be stopped at all through conventional means, cannot be damaged, and even kills other enemies should it roll over them. Its only goal is to flatten any Pikmin or players it comes across, and has to be avoided for the entire duration of the floor should you let it spawn. It comes complete with its own intense music track, which is a rarity amongst Pikmin bosses, and a stark warning by your ship's computer once it spawns. In lore, it's described as a creature that can be seen but not detected by your ship's sensors, a creature that induces insanity-like panic by Olimar, and a creature known to cause mass hysteria by Louie, which he would know a lot about. It can only finally be defeated on the 5th and final floor of the submerged castle, where the player can capitalize on its weakness to purple Pikmin. It also reappears in Pikmin 4, but I haven't played that yet, so let's ignore it for now. The Water Wraith is fascinating as a Nintendo enemy because by all accounts, this is the kind of thing that routinely appears in actual horror games. A pursuer that relentlessly chases the player, cannot be killed or meaningfully damaged, and has to be avoided to survive. That's like a Mr. X or a Scissor Man or an Isolation Xenomorph, and Nintendo was dishing it out with an E rating on the GameCube. It really is no wonder that the Water Wraith left such an impact on everyone who played Pikmin 2 as kids. It really is unlike anything else in a Nintendo game from its time. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time's infamous Dead Hand is another all-time Nintendo boogeyman. I've heard quite a few people say that this is the scariest thing definitively in any Nintendo game to them, which is saying a lot when you take into account everything we'll be discussing in this video. Encountered as a mini-boss in both the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time, the Dead Hand is a shambling, rotting half-zombie with stumps for arms, a gaping mouth, and a stark white body covered in what can only assume to be bloodstains in an arena filled with infinite hands to trap prey. Once something has been gripped by its hands, the creature itself will emerge from the ground and begin shambling towards them, attempting to take a bite out of their skull with its unhinged jaw. To damage it, Link will need to be grabbed by one of its hands to lure it out, and then break free to attack it when it leans in for a bite. It's interestingly lacking completely in lore or an explanation in-game. No NPCs refer to it, and it has no explanatory flavor text. It just exists at the bottom of the otherwise peaceful Kakariko village as well for some reason. I personally find this thing's animations to be particularly troubling. The way it shuffles towards the player with its head held high to avoid exposing its weak point before craning its neck down for the attack is legitimately unsettling, and would be one hell of a last thing to see in universe. Also, it can't go ignored that this thing is just gross. Like, this is an evergreen emotion. A decaying half-zombie covered in blood would be frightening in any context, so having it exist in an E-rated 90s Nintendo game only makes it extra jarring. Fun fact, Nintendo actually removed and recolored the bloodstains in the 3DS version. Wonder why? Giygas of Earthbound fame is a Nintendo boss whose reputation precedes him. Known as one of the most disturbing things ever to be put in a game by this company, it's the final boss of Earthbound, described in-game as the universal cosmic destroyer and the embodiment of evil itself. In the future, it wages an attack on Earth that causes untold destruction, leading to a lone warrior by the name of Buzz to travel back in time and recruit the heroes of legend, who just so happen to be 4 children led by Ness to stop it. Giygas, for his part, also knows about the heroes of legend, as his defeat at their hands was predicted by the enigmatic Apple of Enlightenment, terrifying the creature and starting a desperate push to keep this eventuality from coming to pass. Through sheerly existing, Giygas' influence causes evil and dismay to spread across Ness's world, and once the player's party actually comes face to face with it in the endgame, it's clear why. Giygas appears as a twisting, anguished red maw, with Porky describing how it's lost its ability to think, reason, and even present a corporeal form. It's a being of true, pure hatred. Throughout its battle, Giygas speaks in an equal mix of desperate, pained pleas and exclamations of pleasure, and the player is told that they cannot grasp the true form of its attacks. Now is probably a good time to mention that this boss was allegedly inspired by series director Shigesato Itoi's own experiences accidentally walking into an adult movie theater as a kid and seeing some very not good stuff. As the battle wears on, Giygas' being collapses more and more, to the point that it eventually just appears as an endless pattern of warped red static, and after it's defeated, it vanishes without a trace, never knowing what had happened to it or what it even did. Giygas is such a screwed up thing to exist in a Nintendo game. Like, on every level, this does not belong in this company's catalog, and that's ignoring all of the weird pregnancy and fetus theories that go along with it. I actually recycled a lot of what I said here from my Nintendo bosses that still scare me video, because there's really only so much that you can say about Giygas that hasn't already been said. I guess you could say it's really earned its reputation. The SA-X is our second boss from Metroid Fusion on this list, and is easily one of its most noteworthy and famous aspects on a gameplay level. The ghoulish, emotionless remnants of Samus's removed power suit being piloted by X-Parasites, the main antagonistic threats of Metroid Fusion. The SA-X is a creature rocking all of Samus's strongest weapons and abilities, with none of her conscience or humanity, that only wants her dead. Samus had just recently had this power suit surgically removed due to her X-Parasite infection, leaving her functionally defenseless against this creature with all of her strongest tools. Throughout Metroid Fusion, the SA-X can be found at multiple points patrolling the BSL station, and will attack relentlessly and aggressively should it directly encounter the player. It attacks using all of the abilities you'd expect of a fully powered Fusion-era Samus, so the Ice Beam, Wave Beam, Power Bombs, you name it. It can be encountered many times throughout the game, and cannot be killed until its final, proper boss battle, at which point it'll be forcibly transformed into this giant, grotesque biomess before finally being put down. It was an inspired choice to make the villain of Fusion a monster that effectively boils down to you for the past few games, and making the player helpless in the face of it goes a long way in imparting just how powerful Samus truly is. On a first playthrough, encountering the SA-X is legitimately terrifying and unnerving, and on repeat playthroughs, it's not so much. The E.M.M.Is, or Extraplanetary Multiform Mobile Identifiers, are the staple threats and mini-bosses of Metroid Dread, and they take a lot of what made the SA-X effective and just soup it up with modern design and AI. A series of research robots made of the strongest materials in the known universe, operated by the Galactic Federation, the E.M.M.Is primarily exist for extracting DNA samples, and are typically not enemies to Samus. In the events of Metroid Dread, however, the Galactic Federation catch wind of an X-Parasite outbreak on the remote planet of ZDR, ZDR, and dispatch a group of E.M.M.Is to investigate. They then quickly go dark, leading to the Federation sending Samus after them to see what the deal is. And through the manipulation of the game's main antagonist, Ravenbeak, it's made clear very quickly that Samus will have to contend with the E.M.M.Is. You see, Ravenbeak wants the series' namesake Metroids to stick around, and because Samus is swimming with Metroid DNA, he hacked the E.M.M.Is with the ultimate goal of having them extract said DNA from Samus through any means necessary. Because of this, Samus spends most of Metroid Dread having to carefully and patiently evade the new robotic threat, as their near-indestructible bodies, relentless hunting techniques, and sole programming drive to kill her and extract her Metroid DNA make them easily the most dangerous things to her on ZDR. They exist in a constant hunting state, and their unique physical design allows them to adapt to most environments for the chase. E.M.M.Is, not unlike the SAX, are aggressive hunters who cannot be killed or reasoned with under normal circumstances, only this time there were 7 of them, and getting captured means instant death unless you can time your counters. They were actually designed and conceived years before Metroid Dread was even announced as a means of fleshing out the SAX concept, and while they may lack the personal bent of being a Samus clone, they're even more effective and horrific as threats on a gameplay level for all the same reasons. Mad Jack is a boss appearing in Donkey Kong 64 as the final encounter of its 3rd level Frantic Factory, a large, rusted, cobbled-together living Jack-in-the-Box resembling a duck with wild hair. Mad Jack fights by hopping around the arena, attempting to crush Tiny Kong, and using fireballs and lasers once it stopped moving and revealed itself. Gameplay-wise, Mad Jack isn't that creepy, but it's everything aesthetic in this fight that I'd say makes it slightly unnerving. For one, the battle being set in the darkest section of the already derelict and sterile Frantic Factory is definitely eerie, and Mad Jack's visual design of clearly being a kit bash piece of shit doesn't help. Audio-wise, the battle has an intense driving boss theme that features an insane laugh sound effect as a sample at multiple points. And the boss himself is actually voiced using stock recordings of Donald Duck. Not exactly creepy on its own, but it just adds to the overall surreal nature of this entire battle. Compounding all of this is the overall vibe of the fight, which between all of the aforementioned aspects and general madness of it, just feels very hectic and intense by the standards of this game. I'll admit to not being frightened at all by Mad Jack as an adult, but I can absolutely see why he was a popular choice for a discussion like this for kids who grew up playing Donkey Kong 64. On to more conventionally creepy stuff, we have the Brawl Doll from Wario World, which is one of many bosses encountered in the game. This thing's design is already unsettling, being this giant floating porcelain angel doll, but when you add its spinning Exorcist-esque head and its emotionless facial expressions onto things, it's made clear that this battle was deliberately meant to be eerie. Wario World as a whole is an incredibly creepy and off-putting game. I discussed this in my retrospective on it, but virtually every boss in this game has some weird uncanny valley design to them that's only compounded by the noises they make and the context that they lack. There is never an explanation for the things you're fighting in this game, and Wario himself never properly reacts to them, making things like the Brawl Doll all the more unsettling and deeply confusing. This isn't the only Wario World boss we'll be discussing in this video, so let's save further detailing for our next entry on this game later down the line. Eely Mouth is a boss encountered in Super Mario Sunshine during its otherwise peaceful and serene Noki Bay level, and is a boss I included on my iceberg mostly for personal reasons. To be fair, I did see it brought up a couple times in this context from others, but it's mainly here for me. Taking the form of a gargantuan, split-headed eel with 2 sets of eyes, Eely Mouth rests at the bottom of the darkest trenches of Noki Bay, and is the cause for the area's rampant water pollution that's present in its first few levels. Mario will have to descend to the depths in an effort to clean Eely Mouth's teeth, but it will not make it easy, as it wildly thrashes around and attempts to eat the plumber during the whole process. Admittedly, the concept of cleaning a giant eel's teeth isn't at all frightening, but truthfully, this boss is a thalassophobia nightmare. Slowly descending down this deep, dark trench, seeing 4 glowing eyes peering up at you, and eventually being greeted by a creature large enough to swallow you whole without even realizing it, is actually horrifying to someone with a fear of the deep ocean, and is the kind of thing that I'm glad Mario Sunshine doesn't go for more often. I'll admit that I am a thalassophobia haver. I've had nightmares about waking up in the middle of the ocean and stuff, so my point of view is obviously biased on this boss, but in general, Eely Mouth has troubled me since I first played this game as a very young kid. Mimi is a major antagonist and recurring boss appearing in Super Paper Mario for the Wii. One of the minions of the game's main antagonist, Count Bleck, Mimi's most notable traits are her shape-shifting abilities and her extremely jarring true form. Initially appearing as an innocent young girl, Mimi takes over the mansion of Merly, a character who Mario and Peach are seeking audience with, setting several traps and attempting to discreetly bait Mario and co. into their deaths during Chapter 2. Only after all of her previous attempts has failed does she drop her mask and reveal her true form. Now appearing as a grotesque spider monster with complete invincibility and pieces of her flesh literally dangling off, Mimi chases Mario and co. through Merly's mansion, shooting rubies at them and bellowing her battle cry and a type of text box that's literally only used otherwise for the final boss of the 1,000-Year Door. Once she's made vulnerable and eventually defeated, she extravagantly explodes. It goes on to appear multiple more times in the game, most notably stalling for time against Mario and crew while the game's ever-present void closes in on the Samur Kingdom, leading to its destruction. Mimi is not a boss that takes much explanation to understand why she's so shocking. Her transformation and true form are disturbing enough by Mario standards, but I also want to mention how there's no definitive canon explanation for what she is or why she has the abilities she does in the game. She's got a lot of baggage between her shapeshifting, her invincibility, her association with rubies and love of money, her spider form, and the game makes no effort to elaborate on any of it. The theories that are thrown out include her being a form of failed Pixel, this game's partners, her being a result of witches experimenting with shapeshifting magic, or even a robot. Regardless, there should be no reason that a Mario boss's wiki page contains a lengthy explanation of that boss's similarities to John Carpenter's The Thing. Smithy is the primary antagonist and final boss of Super Mario RPG for the SNES. Mentioned but never seen for most of the game, he's an enigmatic evildoer who sends an army of living weapons into the Mushroom Kingdom with the intent of replacing the dreams of the world with tools of destruction. Once Mario and crew take the fight directly to his homeworld, Smithy can be found angrily pounding away at nothing while wildly ranting at the party, revealing himself in full to be a complete and utter lunatic. After a short first phase of his boss battle, Smithy becomes enraged and destroys the floor of his own factory despite his minions' pleas, landing both him and Mario's party in the factory's derelict underbelly. In this area, several scraps, pieces, and even faces of what can be assumed to be other mass-produced Smithies are seen, and Smithy himself completely sheds his mask, proclaiming his burning rage and hatred for the party and his intentions to take revenge on them. His final phase sees him shifting between various liquid metal forms with different attacks and traits, the creepiest of which is definitely his wide-eyed, gap-toothed default form, and the wizard form, which is literally just another being on top of his neck hole. Smithy isn't too creepy on his own merits, yet his clear madness and revulsion for both Mario's party and the peace and joy of the world around him, his role as a malevolent leader of an army of living weapons, and the eerie red and black background of his final phase, complete with the ever-gazing failed Smithies in the background, lead to his battle having a surprisingly intense and somewhat menacing vibe. A fitting final encounter for Mario's first RPG adventure. Blizzeta is the fifth boss of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, a Zelda game infamous for its darker and more sober subject matter compared to the rest of the series. Encountered after the Snow Peak Ruins dungeon, Blizzeta is actually the possessed form of Yetta, an otherwise entirely friendly and well-meaning NPC who spends a bulk of her time in the game attempting to help Link. However, due to the influence of the Twilight Mirror Shard housed in her home which Link was seeking, she had unknowingly fallen into a state of possession, mistaking her condition for a simple illness. After eating some of her husband Yetto's soup, she finds herself well enough to escort Link to the Mirror Shard, but once she gazes into it, things change significantly. follows is a boss fight against a frozen over possessed Yetta, which sees Link needing to crash away at her icy shell using a ball and chain to free her from her corruption. I'll be honest, Blizzeta isn't that unnerving on a visual level. She's just kind of a big icy statue, but it cannot go deny just how unsettling it is that the Mirror of Twilight's influence can so thoroughly corrupt even entirely peaceful and friendly characters like Yetta. She's a good being, and it's a dire state of things for Link to have to fight her. Also, this may be a bit of a me thing, but I do also legitimately find the possessed Yetta's design to be a bit creepy, jump scare and all. Twilight Princess has this thing going on, where even its friendliest NPCs are made deliberately unsettling, and seeing Yetta's wrapped up, armless body wriggle around while possessed as she screams and howls is unironically pretty creepy, even if it was entirely unintentional. Overall, Blizzeta is a visually standard boss that's made infinitely more unpleasant by your context and especially transformation sequence. At least the soup was good. The Smoky Progg is an infamous enemy from the original Pikmin, basically acting as a proto-water wraith in terms of gameplay concept and execution, appearing only in the distant spring, the game's final traditional area. Should the player manage to reach it within 15 of the game's 30 days, the Smoky Progg is a large, wispy, green and black larva with hollow red eyes and an exposed inner core. It initially appears in an egg, and once awoken, it'll hatch and make a beeline for Olimar's landing site, making it one of very few enemies in the game that'll actively aggress on the player's home base. Once there, it'll stick around patrolling and actively target any Pikmin that exist in the area, even having the entirely unique ability to uproot planted ones. It constantly emits a trail of poisonous gas that can even damage Olimar through his spacesuit, which also significantly kills any Pikmin that come into contact with it. Once spawned before the 15th day, the Smoky Progg will patrol the player's landing site until defeated, effortlessly killing any Pikmin who attempt to cross the area or deliver any items to your ship. It has to be killed once it appears to make meaningful progress in the distant spring, which is not an easy feat because it's very easy to chew through dozens or even hundreds of Pikmin attempting to fight it unprepared. Once defeated, however, the Smoky Progg drops a unique pearl that rewards exactly 100 Pikmin of a specific color when deposited in an onion, meaning that if you manage to kill it while losing less than 100 Pikmin, battling it is morbidly an objective net gain. It's theorized to be a potential mutated or malformed larva of Mamuda, another entirely optional enemy in Pikmin 1, and yeah, I can see it. The Smoky Progg is effective as a creepy enemy because on top of its eerie design and frightening ability to instant kill hundreds of Pikmin, it's entirely missable and only shows itself to players who are efficient enough to reach the distant spring in a timely manner. It's basically a punishment for attempting to speedrun the game, posing an appropriate threat to anyone skilled enough to meet its spawn requirements. It also reappears in Pikmin 4 as well, because I guess that game is the greatest hits medley of all of Pikmin's most iconic enemies. Majora is the final boss of the game named directly after it, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Now, I don't think I have to get into the weeds of describing Majora's Mask as a game or even as a character concept. It's an iconic and harrowing story of what people do in the face of inevitable death, and the mask itself is one of the most famous and ubiquitous images in all of video games. You see merchandise and t-shirts and tattoos of it all the time, at least I do. Basically, the mask is an evil ancient relic. It possessed this kid named Skull Kid, turned the world into a warped reflection of his inner turmoil, and is attempting to crash the moon into said place for the funny. The hero of time, Link, ergo, takes the fight into said moon to find and defeat Majora's Mask, encountering a group of mysterious otherworldly children who ask him if he wants to play. Once he says yes, the final battle is afoot. Majora's first phase is the eponymous mask, floating on its own and sprouting a sea of fleshy tentacles to attack with. It'll float around aimlessly, spin wildly around the arena, and shoot lasers and fire to attack with. Once this simple form is defeated, it'll transform into its second and third forms, which are much more disturbing. Its second form is Majora's Incarnation, a humanoid creature with limbs made of the same fleshy tentacles as its previous form that interestingly barely attempts to fight back, instead hooping and hollering all around the room, screaming and shouting in its distinctive childlike voice as it dances, plays, and runs around without a care. It even hits the moonwalk and the Katsatsuki kick. While being damaged in this form, the creature flails wildly and screams on the ground, not unlike a child throwing a temper tantrum. Its final form, Majora's Wrath, is also the creature's true form. It bulks up as blood rushes through its limbs, growing a nightmarish face and sprouting lengthy tendrils to attack with, all while continuing to laugh and scream in its still childish voice. Once defeated, Majora gives out one final anguished scream as both it and the moon vanish from existence. This battle is creepy for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being Majora's whole personality and demeanor. Throughout the battle, it appears to barely be taking things seriously, or at the very least, deeply relishing in fucking with Link, laughing and dancing and squealing all while attempting to kill him and by extension, the citizens of Termina. It's an intrinsically and deeply evil creature, yet seems to have the maturity of a young child. It gives the vibe of a spoiled, bratty kid, yet wanted the power and maliciousness to carry out any sick whims that it wants. It's a deity who sees the people of Termina as its playthings with the power to match, which is a deeply frightening concept. Also, the whole flesh tentacles coming out of a haunted mask thing definitely doesn't help. Mother Brain is the primary antagonist of the earliest games in the Metroid series, particularly Metroid 1, but for this video, we'll be talking about her iconic appearance in Super Metroid for the SNES. In the original game, Mother Brain is fought as a simple final boss, a brain in a jar that needs to be repeatedly fired on until she explodes, protecting herself with lasers and security drones. This is repeated in Super Metroid, a game that up to this point had soft rebooted a lot of what Metroid 1 did before it. However, savvy players of the original may notice that Mother Brain goes down surprisingly quietly in Super Metroid, barely posing a fight that lives up to this game's elevated standards, and this is because the game was weaponizing your familiarity. Once seemingly defeated, Mother Brain takes on her true new form, a large biomechanical dinosaur-esque body featuring her howling, roaring, drooling, wide-eyed brain atop as a head. She quickly and decisively overpowers Samus, pushing her into a corner with a combination of lasers, bombs, fireballs, and most notably her rainbow hyper beam, which is powerful enough to lift Samus off of the ground and drain her of nearly all of her HP. Just when things seem lost, however, Samus is rescued by the baby Metroid that she had helped in Metroid 2 and re-encountered earlier in this game, who swoops in and gives Mother Brain the good suck before redistributing her energy into Samus. Mother Brain survives and does not take kindly to this, however, killing the baby Metroid right back. However, in its dying moments, the baby bestows Samus a final gift in her own version of Mother Brain's Hyper Beam, which Samus promptly eviscerates Mother Brain with. This is actually, as of now, Mother Brain's last canonical appearance in the series too. This final battle is appropriately harrowing and climactic, with the multiple whammies of Mother Brain's terrifying true form, her grotesque sound design, Samus's near defeat, and the baby Metroid sacrifice, making this an all-time great for the SNES. A lot of people still believe this Mother Brain to be the scariest thing in the entire Metroid series, and with everything we've discussed in this video already, that's a high bar to clear. Zero is the true final boss of Kirby's Dream Land 3, and in a meta sense is basically the Proto-Zero 2, appearing immediately after the player has defeated Dark Matter with very little fanfare or explanation. Zero is a large white orb with a single blood-red eye that attacks by shooting smaller dark matters at Kirby. It lacks any significant lore or in-game explanation, and is only presumed to be the creator of Dark Matter due to in-game context clues. After taking enough damage, it'll rather notably for a Kirby game, start shooting globs of its own blood out of open slits on its body, which actively splatter against the screen during its background attack. And if you don't believe that it's blood, well... This gruesome transformation animation, as well as Zero's other attacks, actually led to the Kirby's Dream Collection for Wii receiving an E10 rating from the ESRB over the original game's E, with the board specifically describing how, quote, one boss character, a giant eyeball, fires red droplets at Kirby, and citing animated blood as a reason for the rating. I personally find Zero to be significantly more troubling than Zero 2, if only for its extreme lack of context or fanfare in the game itself. It literally just appears in a flash of light, and because that transformation animation is probably one of the most outwardly gruesome things that's ever been allowed to exist in a Nintendo game, even compared to more famously mature series like Fire Emblem or Metroid. Kirby is hardcore, I'll tell you that for free. The Winter Windster is another boss from Wario World, and the last one we'll be discussing for this video. It's also the one that I find to be the most unsettling out of every boss in this game, even more so than the Brawl Doll. A large, floating, nondescript blue creature with an enormous head, tiny, stiff body, rosy complexion, disinterested facial expression, and wild hair, the Winter Windster attacks by absently floating around the arena, barely taking notice of Wario, and dropping small bombs every few seconds. It'll also occasionally try and freeze Wario, and should it succeed, will jump scare the player by landing and sprinting full tilt at them. The overall atmosphere of this battle is very bizarre, even by Wario World standards, with its booming music and the boss's vaguely disinterested demeanor, just giving it a paradoxical and very uncomfortable vibe. However, the craziest part is easily the Winter Windster's ultimate attack, which the player is warned about before its battle. The camera will shift to lock onto it, and its eyes will begin glowing a bright red, while the fire pits around the arena begin erupting. Should the player have Wario look directly into its eyes, this'll happen. Now, this isn't exactly frightening, it's pretty cartoony and silly, but it's so damn shocking and unexpected should you let it happen, and it is very much unlike anything else in this game. The camera rarely ever moves like this in Wario World, and very few other bosses have these sort of cinematic special attacks, so it all adds up to make the Winter Windster's battle one that feels alarmingly different and much less explainable than any other battle in the game. It's not Peter Pan scary, just very unnerving and extremely bizarre. And speaking of Peter Pan scary, we have Smithy, an entirely optional portrait ghost from the original Luigi's Mansion, and our only entry from this game in the entire video. Now, I don't find Luigi's Mansion to be a particularly frightening game in any capacity, but I do appreciate it for just feeling a touch more tense and menacing than any of the other games in the series that come after it. It'll occasionally flirt with more traditional horror ideas over Halloween-y spookiness, and Smithy is a great example of that. She's the ghost of a young girl who can found ominously sleeping in her upside-down room, and warns Luigi to leave immediately once he enters. She also strangely promises not to wet the bed when examined, which Luigi can exploit through spraying water on her to initiate her battle. In her fight, she attacks by hurling nearby clown dolls at Luigi, yet when all said and done, she's not too dissimilar from any other portrait ghost in the game. So why is she in this video? Yeah, she's the ghost of a dead child. Her in-game bio reads, "What was meant to be a short nap seems to have turned into eternal rest for sweet Smithy," hard confirming that she, unlike most of the game's other portrait ghosts, is definitively the spirit of a deceased human kid. This can be inferred for a lot of the game's other portrait ghosts, and some of them, like Mr. Lugs, also directly mention being dead humans. However, many others mention having peaceful afterlives, or cases like Baby Chauncey or the Clockwork Soldiers who explicitly mention having been born or created as ghosts. By comparison, Smithy being the confirmed spirit of a dead 7-year-old who suddenly and unexpectedly passed away in her sleep is surprisingly grim by Luigi's Mansion standards. And several other small factors in this battle, like her residing specifically in the guest room and being afraid of wetting the bed, suggest all sorts of eerie hidden lore. It makes you wonder just what happened to suddenly off this 7-year-old. Again, nothing exactly horrifying, just really unsettling and uncharacteristically grim for this game in terms of its implications. Puppet Ganon is the penultimate boss of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker for GameCube, and if I must be brutally honest, is probably the boss in this entire video that still gets me the most. I could not explain to you why in any earthly capacity. Battle just before the final boss as a means for Ganondorf to stall and distract Link, Puppet Ganon is a decoy form of the true King of Evil that reveals itself in a cutscene which features him roaring in anger while his bones crack. Once the battle begins proper, Puppet Ganon will begin very quickly and erratically shuffling around the arena in an almost dance-like taunting manner, while the equal parts intense and jesting music sounds off in the background. I first played Wind Waker to completion when I was in my early 20s, and for some reason, I found Puppet Ganon's animations and vibes to be so deeply unnerving that I had trouble looking at the screen to fight him. I genuinely think that it's some kind of primal 8-brain panic response to a large, intimidating creature moving this fast and unpredictably, as I don't often struggle with enemies like this in other contexts. But Puppet Ganon's sheer size, the speed and ferocity of his movements, and the music in this battle all combine into this sort of gel of visual and audio unpleasantness that I was not ready for. It barely even attacks you, it generally just tries to make its movements unpredictable and hard to follow, as to keep you from cutting its strings with your boomerang. Funnily enough, I also didn't find either of its second two forms to be nearly as unnerving, even his spider form or madcap intense snake form. It's just the initial first phase and his dance of death that really got to me. I'll be the first to admit that this is one of the bosses I included in the video for me and me alone, so please let me know if Puppet Ganon got you as well. Hopefully as a kid and not as a 20-something like me. Andross is the primary antagonist and true final boss of Star Fox 64. Initially a benevolent scientist dedicated to helping the Lilat system, Andross eventually lost himself in dangerous bioweapon experimentation, earning him an exile to the derelict planet Venom. However, he survived his banishment and only grew in both madness and his legions, sending an all-out attack against the Lilat system that saw the mercenary group Star Fox being sent to stop him. Andross actually had a direct hand in the death of Fox's father, James, leading to a bit of an antagonistic history between them. After reaching Venom and dispatching their rival Starwolf, Fox tails Andross alone into his underground laboratory, where the evil-minded ape taunts Fox in his unique red text box before revealing himself for battle. Initially appearing as a giant warped biomechanical head and hands, Andross attacks by blasting lasers, punching, and attempting to eat Fox, although the battle is short-lived nonetheless. Once seemingly defeated, Andross screams and flails as he sheds his outer skin, ultimately revealing his true form as a giant floating brain. In this giant brain form, Andross floats around the arena, teleporting about with reckless abandon, while ominously laughing and echoing throughout the arena, sending his loose eyeballs out as drones to attack with, and grappling Fox with his exposed tentacles. Once he's defeated for good, he gives out a final yell of defiance, attempting to take Fox down with him in the resulting explosion. Fox is narrowly saved by an apparition of his late father James, who leads him on a madcap escape through Andross's floating base, finally praising his son's strength with his last words. And the mad scientist Andross would never ever be back in the Star Fox series. Seriously though, the final battle against Andross is legitimately intimidating and very menacing for an N64 game. Between his booming, deep, and echoing voice provided excellently by the late Rick May, his constant laughter and taunt, and the overall insane imagery of the battle between his different forms, the nondescript background, and the final arena being nothing more than a large, empty, and dark metallic room. He's probably one of the most menacing final bosses on the entire console, and one that I do feel significantly steps things up compared to his already creepy SNES counterpart. That's the one that got into Smash though, so who's the real winner? Armogohma is another boss from the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, this time being the boss of the Temple of Time, and this one really shouldn't be too difficult to explain because it's just a giant fuck-off spider. No necessary lore or backstory, it's just a big, startlingly realistic spider with an eyeball on its back that does spider things. Armogohma attacks by scuttling around the arena, firing lasers, and giving live birth to have its babies attack Link, and has to be shot in its eyeball and crushed by giant nearby hand statues to damage it. It's a surprisingly straightforward an easy battle for the point in the game it's encountered at, with most of its memorability coming from its intensely skin-crawling design. Gohmas and Gohma bosses have appeared in Zelda before this, but none to this degree of realism or detail. You can see its hairy legs, its patterned abdomen, and it even does the gross curling up thing that real spiders do when they die. For my money, someone with arachnophobia, this is the second grossest spider boss of its era, behind only the Black Tiger from the Resident Evil remake. It's a good thing the battle against it is as simple as its design, because I really don't want to look at Armogohma for long. The Plasm Wraith, and yes, I know it says Plasma Wraith on the iceberg, I apologize, is the final boss of Pikmin 3, and a presumed evolution or mutation of Pikmin 2's Water Wraith. Great start. A large gelatinous creature made out of gold-colored plasma, this creature took an ominously strong liking to Captain Olimar during one of his return trips to planet PNF 404, also known as the home of the Pikmin. It kidnapped Olimar during his investigation of its home, the Formidable Oak, and while initially friendly, it became upset and aggressive when Olimar attempted to leave, knocking him out and obsessively keeping him close as a sort of trophy. When uncovered by the Pikmin 3 captains, the Plasm Wraith immediately goes on the attack, dragging Olimar away and chasing the crew throughout the Formidable Oak in an effort to keep them from taking him. They have to avoid it for most of the area, all while dealing with enemies and obstacles like normal along the way. Once they've escaped, the Plasm Wraith emerges in its true form, a wobbly humanoid lacking a head or proper arms, and attacks the crew and their Pikmin in equal measure with a mixture of bizarre gangly attacks. It's established in lore that the Plasm Wraith is virtually invincible, as it can be seen escaping even after its final defeat, and it's heavily suggested to be a creature whose existence embodies the will of planet PNF 404 itself. It controls and has its genetic mark in every creature on the planet, and could possibly even be behind the repeated ship crashes that have occurred at the planet throughout the series. As a design, it's definitely nondescript and a little weird, but the true creepiness of the Plasm Wraith comes from its control over the environment around it, its unexplained and unkillable nature, and its possessiveness over Olimar. Just what it is, why it so strongly took to him, and to what degree its power over the planet extends are never explained by the game itself, and we can only infer based on the information that it's given to us. It could even have a degree of control over the Pikmin themselves, which is a truly harrowing concept. Robot Andross is another option for the final boss of Star Fox 64, this time being the game's easy mode, bad ending final opponent. If the player winds up on the easy route of a Star Fox 64 playthrough and fails to correct themselves by the time they reach Venom, rather than fighting true Andross and saving the Lilat system, they'll be faced with his decoy robot doppelganger instead. And in this case, I find his robot form to be much more frightening. His hollow lit-up eyes, his goblin-like ears and appearance, the warped green background from the base Andross battle, his rapid mad cat biting. He's a deliberately easy throwaway battle that only serves to key players into the fact that they didn't get the true ending and leave them deliberately unsatisfied. Yet I legitimately find his design and sudden appearance to be truly off-putting. I remember watching my older brother play this battle for the first time as a young kid, and being so oddly frightened by it that I needed help walking to the bathroom as a kid, and it stuck with me for a very long time. And all of this for the game's throwaway easy mode boss that's only on screen for a couple seconds at best. This is also the last entry on this list that I'm including primarily for me. I apologize. Queen Gibdo is one of the 4 primary dungeon bosses in the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, this time appearing as the boss of the Lightning Temple and the whole Gerudo section of the game as a whole. Gibdos are recurring enemies in the Legend of Zelda series, typically appearing as archetypal undead mummies, yet Tears of the Kingdom specifically gives them a bit of a facelift, with them gaining traits of hive mind insects and a more general animalistic vibe on top of their already existing undead theming. Queen Gibdo, the leader of the Gibdos, embodies this, appearing as a large moth-like insectoid creature with hollow eyes and a multi-section body, yet still very clearly being undead in multiple capacities. She's capable of flight and manipulating the sand and wind around her, and the battle against her is noteworthy for being the consensus pick for hardest and normal dungeon boss in this game, with her second phase specifically giving players a lot of trouble. She flies around, throwing tornadoes and streams of sand at the player, and after sustaining enough damage, will retreat and release waves of Gibdos from the hives around her arena, with their numbers becoming so large by the end of the fight that it can both be legitimately hard to manage, as well as lag your game. It shouldn't take rocket science to figure out why some players found Queen Gibdo to be particularly frightening. The concept of a massive hybrid undead insect creature with control over an army of offspring is already freaky, yet the sheer intensity and overwhelming nature of her battle really sells that she's not an opponent in Tears of the Kingdom to be trifled with. If you choose to do the Gerudo section of your game early in your playthrough, then you can expect to be thoroughly and decisively mollywopped. I saw a few brief mentions of different Tears of the Kingdom enemies and bosses while researching this video, yet none of them appeared as often or strikingly in their descriptions as Queen Gibdo, and I can definitely see why. Grima is the main antagonist and final proper boss of Fire Emblem Awakening, known by other titles including the Fell Dragon, Despair, The End, and The Creation. Grima is an all-powerful alchemical abomination with a seething hatred for humanity and a sole desire to see it fully done away with. Created by an alchemist named Fornius through a lengthy experimentation process, Grima began life as a simple homunculus with a gentle smile. However, as time wore on, it slowly mutated in both appearance and mind, growing increasingly malevolent and hateful, leading it to eventually kill its creator and vowing to do the same to anyone who opposes it. 1,000 years later, now going by the name of Grima, the creature led a legion of both undead soldiers known as the Risen, and an army of fanatical cultist followers known as the Grimleal, with the ultimate goal of snuffing out life as a whole. Talking about all of Grima's manipulations and evil actions throughout the game would effectively boil down to an entire plot summary of Fire Emblem Awakening, as his influence both directly and indirectly spreads through most of the game. But for a few cliff notes, he successfully defeats most of humanity in the game's alternate future, only being opposed by Lucina traveling back in time to stop him, possesses the player character Robin for a large chunk of the game, manipulates and sees to the deaths of many innocent people, and in some form or fashion through the game's multiple timelines and endings, succeeds in a lot of his ambitions throughout the game's narratives. Even in the best outcomes, several good people still need to give their lives and sacrifice a ton to fully snuff out Grima and his plans. He's a rare example of an arrogant, boastful, and wrathful RPG villain who actually has the accomplishments, power, and pedigree to back up his attitude, and that combined with his sway over his followers and far-reaching goals, which he partially succeeds in a good number of ways, makes him easily one of Nintendo's most fearsome, frightening, and in my opinion, underrated villains. Moebius D, initially known as Console D and initially as Black Blaze Dirk, is a recurring antagonist and boss featured in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now, I'm just gonna be upfront here. This one is a confidence level 0 from me, Chief. Everything in this iceberg has been something I've been at least partially familiar with, but I have not played or even been exposed much to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 outside of no new SFM animation, so I apologize if I get anything wrong here. Regardless, D is a Moebius, a member of the core villainous faction of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, who is known to deeply revel in the death and suffering of others. Initially an ordinary soldier by the name of Black Blaze Dirk, D particularly enjoys the spilling of blood and inflicting of both physical and emotional pain on others, keeping a collection of his victims' severed heads as trophies both before and after becoming a Moebius. A true card-carrying sadist, D is known to viciously attack both his targets' bodies and minds in battle. In one instance, taking particular pleasure in inducing post-traumatic episodes in Uni, one of the game's main party members, through taunting her about having killed her in a past life. As a Moebius, D wears an elaborate set of red metallic armor and can undergo a nightmarish transformation when the chips are down to both power up and induce greater fear in his opponent. In this form, he gains a reptilian, shark-like appearance and an even greater degree of ferocity and bloodlust. Additionally, he's capable of interlinking, an ability that allows him to temporarily fuse with other Moebius consoles, which he does with his ally Jay in an effort to outmatch the player's party. Later on, after Jay has been defeated and successfully reasoned with and talked down by the party, D takes it upon himself to forcefully re-interlink with him against his will, demanding enough power to kill the heroes. This action eventually results in both of their deaths, with Jay sacrificing himself to see both of them finally killed. Again, I'm not terribly familiar with the broad strokes of Xenoblade Chronicles 3's story or characters, but I do find the degree of brutality, sadism, and ruthlessness that D displays to be legitimately unnerving, especially for a character out of what's effectively a Nintendo game, and would definitely encourage some of y'all who might write off the series to play or at least read about it if you're at all curious and seeing how any of this story stuff plays out. It's certainly more intense and interesting than I initially thought anyways. The Masked Man is the final boss of Mother 3, and surprisingly enough, is not its main antagonist. At the beginning of Mother 3, the main character, Lucas, loses both his mother Hinawa and his brother Klaus to an attack by a Mecha Drago, a usually friendly dragon that's been cybernetically modified by the enigmatic Pig Mask army. For the rest of the game, Lucas and his plucky band of rebels battle and attempt to stop the evil ambitions of said Pig Mask gang, as their actions grow increasingly cruel and threaten the lives of the people in the land around them. Later in the game, Lucas and crew encounter a Pigmask army commander known only as the Masked Man, a ruthless human chimera with no heart who acts solely on the command of the army's leader, Porky. The army's ultimate goal is to pull the game's 7 needles, 7 mysterious relics that, when plucked from the ground, will release a dark dragon whose actions align with the heart and soul of the person who pulls them. A good heart means a benevolent dragon, and an evil heart means destruction. Lucas and the Masked Man are the only people who can pull the needles due to their PSI abilities, beginning a mad race between Lucas's party and the Pigmask army to pull more than the other. In the game's final moments, after all but one of the needles have been plucked, Lucas and crew defeat Porky by locking him permanently inside of his absolutely safe capsule. The only one standing between them and the final needle is the Masked Man, who's revealed to be, in truth, Lucas's resurrected brother Klaus. Throughout the battle, Lucas's emotional turmoil is put on full display, as the emotionless husk of his brother wears away at him with powerful attacks, and no heartbeat can be heard emanating from him. That is, until the spirit of the two's mother, Hinawa, calls out. She beseeches Klaus to come to his senses and rediscover his humanity, a plea that after a while does reach him. Klaus then takes off his helmet, looks his brother in the eyes, and casts a powerful lightning bolt directly into Lucas's reflective Franklin badge, bouncing it back at himself and immediately ending his own life. Lucas has no time to mourn, and he steps forward to pluck the 7th needle. What follows is... So, Mother 3 has a reputation for being one of the darkest, most sobering, and most upsetting games Nintendo has ever produced, and while I only gave you an abridged version of it here, the story of the Masked Man is easily one of the most noteworthy reasons for that. This is the story of 2 children, brothers even, who were placed on opposite ends of an impossible conflict, with one of them being forced to do so many terrible things that he chooses death by his own hands in the instant that he regains consciousness. The other one is forced to endure it as a survivor, and is put in a position where his understandable emotional pain results in him ultimately failing in his goal to save the land around him. It is shown at the end of the game that a lot of characters did survive, but the extent of the devastation caused by the final needle will never truly be known. And all of this is on the same machine that plays the Drake and Josh game. And that's it. That's my first iceberg. I hope you enjoyed. This is not really something I've done before, so let me know if I did something right or wrong. I realize that I didn't cover every possible base that I could have here. There are certainly more Zelda or Kirby or Mother bosses that I could have discussed, but I wanted to try and get a good variety of bosses from different games and series, and also discuss some stuff that isn't so commonly brought up in this context. Either way, thanks. Hope y'all had a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Happy Halloween and cheers. If you enjoyed, feel free to hit the like button or anything like that. If not, I understand. Thanks again, and I'll see y'all later.